one of my favorite books called The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, within which, I'm not sure if he coined the phrase, it's been in and out and around the consciousness for a long time, but there really is no such thing as a free lunch. So what I mean by that is very often you can find open source code, and very often it will look like Apple's code does, but there's always a catch. And I'm going to go through a few open source projects, some of the more famous ones, one a little bit less famous, one a whole lot less famous, give you an idea of the way I think, and give you an idea of how to go about evaluating these kinds of things. And as importantly, I'm going to give you an idea of how to use them. These are, in one case, particularly popular, but also not always very easy to use. So having not been introduced is actually serendipitous, because I wanted to mention that, yes, I am the CEO of this little company of mine, but I spend probably 12 hours a day writing code. And then I spend about 4 hours a day looking at other people's code. So I spend a lot of time looking at code. I don't spend 8 hours a night sleeping, unfortunately, which is why I'm kind of like this all the time. But looking at a lot of people's code and having been just steeped in this platform, which can cause some certain everything looks like a nail because all you have is a hammer problems. The good thing that it's done for me is it's given me a lot of insight into what good code in Objective-C looks like, what good code in Python looks like, because I spend a lot of time in Python. And some of the open source projects out there are by people who, like many of us in the iPhone development world, are new to it. And they're getting it, but they're not quite getting it. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So the first one is really famous. We're going to take one small part of a really big library called 320. Who's used or knows of 320? Yeah. So it was started by this dude called Joe Hewitt. It's the underpinnings of the Facebook app. Joe is an HTML, CSS guy from way back, was not, when he started this, an Objective-C developer, and has since quit, actually, iPhone development. He still works for Facebook, and he's now one of their senior web developers. And he fairly publicly quit, and the reason for that was, well, he didn't really like the App Store policies. And so we're first going to talk about the image viewer in 320, how to use it, some of the gotchas. So here's Apple's on the left side. That's my dog, Beatrice. And there's Joe and friends. It's a very large group of people now who have contributed to 320 over the course of now, I think, 3 years. And there is, the flipping image view. There's Apple's. There's Joe and companies. And that, again, is my dog, Beatrice. So the first thing is a demo. Who knows Julia Childs? Yeah? So I'm going to do my best Julia Childs impression. I hope it doesn't smell as bad as that fish. But yeah, she's a kind of a hero of mine. So the place to go, actually, let me just put this back up. GitHub.com/Facebook/320 is, I think, still the canonical place to go get it. At least that's where I went and got the latest one last night. Let's see. So there's a lot of stuff inside the 320. We're going to focus on this one. I might just make that bigger. Hang on. There we go. So it has the photo browser. What you may have noticed is that there are a couple of photos that are no longer available on Flickr. So what this is doing is it's actually downloading these photos in the background using the Flickr API. And so the way that 320 works in order to load its data is it uses this thing called a TT model. And inside of a TT model is actually the ability for it to notify delegates and other objects, when it actually has data. So this data can be local or remote, very useful. And then if I click on one of these, you can see that it's downloaded the low-resolution version, and now it's using this kind of rickety internet connection I have running right now to download, there we go, the higher-resolution version. And so Apple doesn't give us this view, and if they did, they may not give us that cool stuff. And so this is really quite useful when you have a series of photos that you'd like to show the user, and that you'd like to use views idiomatic to the iPhone. Apple spends a lot more time in R&D than either you or I have, and one of the things that I like to try to do in my own code is either find some means by which to show the user something that they're accustomed to seeing, or something that is familiar in some other way. And so in this case, it's basically a straight-up rip-off of Apple, and great artists steal, right? And it has the usual pinching, zooming thing, which is going to look awful right now, but hey, who cares? There we go. And no, that's not me. We're not all cowboys. And the double tap to zoom and the whole 9 yards. That's what it looks like. So here's how to use it. 320 is now a series of static libraries. Static libraries are a great idea, and I sure wish they worked better. But Xcode hates them with some kind of, I don't know, insane satanic passion. It takes me about 4 tries to get this right every time I try to use a static library that is a dependency of another application. Little pro tip. The way to make it work the best is to make the new Xcode, what's that thing that allows you to put different projects inside of it's like an Uber project? Who remembers? Because I just forgot. I'll go look. Workspace. Yay. Okay, so put all the projects in a workspace, and then in the preferences, there's a place, and I can never find it, and I usually have to Google it. It takes me 10 minutes, so I'm just going to tell you to Google it like I always do. There's a way to tell it to put all of the builds per configuration inside of the same directory. And then, once you've got that working, your app, which will compile all of these static libraries, will get them compiled in the same place or very near the app, and then the way that Xcode is able to find statically compiled libraries, whether or not it actually can figure out the path, because half the time it can't, it still usually is able to link to them. It's the only way I can ever get Xcode to do static libraries, but the underlying point is be really careful when you're trying to set up 320 because there are gotchas everywhere. And at the end you'll see my email address. You can always email me for help. So it's a static library, or it's a series of static libraries. They've actually made more static libraries because they're trying to break it up into smaller chunks, and it's actually making it even harder to use in a way. But you remember Objective-C protocols from my last talk? I don't know how many of you were in there. So I know Objective-C protocols. More people this time. All right, I won't talk about them this time. So it has, inside of 320 there is a TT photo source conforming object, which vends TT photos. So there's this thing called TT photo source, and it has a series of photos inside, and I'll show you what those are in a second. And we'll look at that in a second, blah, blah, blah. So hold on to your hats. There's a protocol called TT model. That's the thing that tells you whether or not it's been loaded. This is the thing that, in the case of our subclass of TT photo, which is itself a TT model, see how painful 320 can get? Will then return is loaded as no while it's loading from the internet, and is yes after it's finished loading from the internet. it has a method called isLoading. isLoading more, so you remember when the images were low resolution, right? And then as they were loading the second time, they started spinning again. That's when isLoading more becomes true. And then isOutdated is a means by which for your app to tell the loading mechanism that, hey, this data is probably stale. Go get the new stuff. And it has a load. So 320 has this really nice and very useful URL request cache. And so it has its own sort of URL loading tool. And inside of it, it has a key value cache, wherein if you download a photo once, it'll dump it onto disk. Actually, it leaves it in memory at first, but then it dumps it onto disk when memory gets low. And it will allow you then to keep this stuff local that you've already downloaded. It's all just kind of batteries included. And you can cancel it, and invalidate is a little bit weird. We won't talk about that. So, TTURL object is the way that cache works. It is a name-value pair that you can say the name of this image is bloody flu, and its value is this URL. So, how it works. You've got a TT photo view controller, that's this guy, and a TT thumbs view controller is that guy over there. I used to have a laser pointer. I still have a laser pointer. Cool. The TTURL cache will cache the images to memory and or to disk. You can tell it what sort of policies you want to use for caching. And I really hope I don't push this button while I'm pointing at you. I'm sorry if I do. Free laser surgery. And then the TTURL request queue, it handles the downloading of images. So what happens is when the Facebook loading images doodad comes up, it says, okay, here are all the images that I need that are currently on screen. And it loads all of those things into the TTURL request queue. What it does is it pulls down all those little thumbnails, and it dumps those into a TTURL cache, first in memory, then on disk, depending on how you're doing it. And then what shows them is the TT thumbs view controller. And when you tap on one of these, it loads a TT photo view controller. So TT photo source is both a TT model and a TTURL object. And what that really means is this is what vends my photos, right? And so the TT photo view controller, you give it the number of photos, you say what the latest index that's been loaded already, and actually it does that for you, and then you vend photo at index in your TT photo source object. So you've got a protocol that's made up of a bunch of other protocols, that's made up of a bunch of other protocols, but underneath the covers, the important thing to know in order to use this photo view controller is that you have to implement a TT photo source. And the nice thing about Objective-C is going to give you a whole lot of warnings until you've implemented all the stuff that you need to implement. So if you want to get your photos from somewhere else, I suggest you go and look. I'm not going to push this button. I suggest you go and look in the sample code for the, what was it called that I just ran? TT catalog. And that will show you the basic implementation that downloads stuff from the internet. So again, TT photo source vends TT photos, right? So you've got a TT photo photo at index. So if you've got the series of 30 photos, let's say 16 because it's more fun to do 4x4. You've got the series of 16 photos, and you can say photo at index 0, photo at index 1, etc., and it fills up the view. So TT photo is the thing that TT photo source vends. TT photo is just an object that models a photo. It has a reverse reference to its photo source. It has a size, a visual physical size. And remember that visual physical size may not be the same as the size that you're downloading. In the case of, for instance, the the Flickr download that it's doing, it's actually downloading a smaller version, but it's stretching it to fit its eventual size. And then index where it lives inside of the photo source, and if it has a caption. Apple's photo doodad doesn't actually have captions, but 320's does, so you can put a caption on them if you want. And then URL for version. So TT photo version is a means by which to say I want low resolution, medium resolution, high resolution. I think there are 4. Maybe there's ultra high resolution. I forget. So if you want to just load them from the app's bundle, you can use bundle and then some image file name. And what it'll do is it'll parse that URL and it'll say, oh, you want this from the bundle, and it goes and it finds it inside of the app's bundle. If you want to load images from the user's documents directory, you do the same thing, but you use documents. So if, for instance, you wanted to build a photo viewer that just pulled images, like say you've got 15 images in the bundle and you want to be able to browse them, you would use this. You'd make a TT photo source that has a sort of statically allocated set of image names, and then you could vend them from there. So there's some kind of other neat stuff about 320. It has URL-based navigation that can persist the path taken to a given view controller. So the way this works is that when you load your app, you can say that this view controller corresponds to this URL. So let's pretend we have an app that we have, let's pretend we wrote the Facebook app. We'll have Facebook app : // and the name of the view controller, and maybe some metadata like an ID of something that it wants to load. The application is able to sort of track what URLs you're taking to get through your app, and it will cache those, and so that when the app gets shut down, say it's been backgrounded or it's on an older device, it then replays that series of UI interactions to get you to the same spot in the app that you were when it shut down. And it also has a lot of really nice UI code. For some reason that passes all understanding, Apple has yet to give us pretty buttons. And this has a whole lot of really nice sort of objects for making pretty buttons, and I'll show you a few of them in a second, including like different colored sort of arrow buttons that look very similar to Apple's. It actually has decent visual error handling for cloud-based apps. So if for whatever reason you aren't able to reach a given URL, it throws up a nice little page that has a little no smoking sigil or something that says, hey, we can't find this thing. Let me show you some of the other stuff in there. So you can see that it just reloaded itself where we were before. That's how that works. And so every time I tap one of these, it's actually loading a URL in the background, and the application's delegate talks to a thing called TT Navigator that actually navigates stuff around. And even if you don't use 320, I've found in my last several projects that using a sort of global navigator to navigate between view controllers in your app works pretty well. I've found that Apple's samples and Apple's templates don't scale particularly well. So in larger applications, when one view controller may, under certain circumstances, need to be followed by a different view controller than it does in other circumstances, it's difficult, and it seems to break encapsulation in my mind to put inside of a given view controller, oh, what comes next? Instead, what I tend to do is I'll create a delegate protocol that talks to a global navigation object that says, hey, I just selected an object, it's an object at this index. The delegate will call the object back and say, okay, what is the object at the index that you told me about? It'll grab that thing and say, okay, under the current circumstances and the current context, what view controller do I need to load now? And I turned an iPad app for the one I talked about in the earlier talk for a major US publisher into an iPhone app in about 6 days because my view controller code was pretty tight, and because the navigation controller was all in one place, so I could just say, okay, when I'm on the iPad, I need to load these things. When I'm on the iPhone, I need to load these things. And if you don't end up drilling down inside of your view controllers to figure out what needs to happen on a given platform or under certain circumstances, there's just one place to go for that kind of stuff. So I got that idea from 320. Look at TT Navigator. It's really pretty cool. So we've got all these little buttons and stuff. All this stuff is written in Core Graphics, so it scales well. These are not images, not even that little guy. It has these really nice tab views. I use this one in an app of mine. Let's see. YouTube player, not so useful. Tables with shadows, see that? That's actually kind of hard to write. It's actually atypical to get tables with shadows. You have to actually do quite a bit of work. Oh, look at that, crashed. Oh well. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. A friend of mine who gives talks a lot got all hand wavy and kind of freaked out because something didn't work, and he says, if I wave my hands enough, maybe I can fly out of here. So style labels, you can put inline stuff inside of labels. It's got divs and spans and all kinds of stuff. There's this beta thing that I really hate, but that some people who do a lot of web development are like totally freaking out about, and that's the ability to set up cascading style sheets for your app. That's all inside of 320. And there's a new project. Okay, so a guy who worked at Facebook after Joe is named Jeff Verkoyen. I'm probably butchering his name. And he took over the app and the development of the app for Facebook as well as for 320. And he's recently opened a new project that's a spin-off of 320 called Nimbus. It's available on GitHub. Verkoyen is Verkoyen, I think. And the app, the framework is called Nimbus, like cumulonimbus, the clouds, Nimbus. And what his stated goal is to take some of the awesome of 320 and get rid of some of the spaghetti. So I was talking about TT Photo and TT Photo View Controller and TT blah, 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 blah. It's just like there's turtles all the way down, right? And so the difficulty in using 320 is that you've got all these protocols and you have to understand the way it likes to load data. Nimbus is expected to remove that. I haven't spent a lot of time looking at it, but they do have that cool Photo View Controller thing.
Style views or some of these buttons in another app.
Mm-hmm.
I can just use that part of it. Right?
So here's the pain, the other part of the pain of 320. Yes and no. You can just use them. The problem is that they have dependencies and imports on stuff that they don't actually use. So it's not the world's cleanest code. Where's my clean code guy? He disappeared. It's not the world's cleanest code. There's actually quite a bit of spaghetti in there. The way that I learned how to do some of the drawing that was being done in there is through here, but I didn't use it directly. All right, so I tend to use 320, I tended to use 320 as sort of an example for how do I make a button that kind of looks like that.
Okay,
and so then I rip it out and just use it myself. Because unless you want to go like all the way down into the pool with 320, it's best not to dip in your toe. Because you're just going to drag the whole pool with you anyway.
Besides, Apple will not agree to that.
Louder, please.
Apple will not agree to use that directly. Okay. Can we use all this code?
Yeah. It's not private frameworks. This is all fully re-implemented. So when Apple runs their static analyzer, when you upload your app, and they go, that's not, none of that's in there. 320 has had a few rejections. Sort of systemic rejections over time, and there was a certain reputation for a while that 320 was not safe for the App Store, which you may have heard. And what that was is that they accidentally left a pound define in release code that did some hacking on UIView for some testing, and they accidentally left it in the release code, which meant everybody who had updated to that version of 320 then got their app rejected, and the whole community had a hissy fit. So it wasn't really. It was an avoidable error, but it was an understandable error. And now it's given it an unfortunate continuing reputation for being kind of hackish. It's not hackish in the I'm using Apple's code way. It's hackish in the this might not be the best Objective-C ever kind of way. But it is very, very useful, don't get me wrong. And if you really want to use the whole thing as a system, it becomes its own sort of SDK, sort of on top of Apple's. And there are worse SDKs out there that sort of aren't built in Objective-C that you could go with, and this isn't also a very bad way to learn how to do some of that drawing stuff. So even if you don't choose to use it, it's a good place to dig around and go, oh, how did they make that cool little button thing? So documentation for 320 is available here. You might find a mailing list that's deprecated. If you start posting on it, people will start yelling at you. Welcome to open source software. They move their mailing list to an API doc site that's harder to use, and then they get mad at you for using the old mailing list. You can email me if you want. I don't, common disclaimer, I don't work for Apple. I also am not affiliated with 320, but I do use it often enough to know the common pitfalls and problems. So you can feel free to bug me about it. And take a look at Nimbus before you go too deep with 320, because there's a lot of neat new stuff going on in there that I just have not yet had time to drop into this talk. So again, the next 320 is Nimbus. It's a fork. This is a really cool, I don't think I would have the discipline to do this, but his stated goal is that Nimbus is an iOS framework whose feature set grows only as fast as documentation, so they won't actually put anything in the code until it's been documented. That is totally awesome, and I have, I don't know, thank you, great respect, because I don't have the guts to do it.
So what kind of feature set?
Oh, I'm sorry?
What kind of feature set does it have?
So far, it's got the photo view, and that's all I've looked at. It's got the photo view that we just talked about, and that's really all I've looked at. There's some other stuff in there, and one of the other things that it does is it uses other common pieces of open source code that a lot of us are using to do some of the things that 320 had implemented on their own. So it's using ASI HTTP requests to do downloads instead of its own. And ASI HTTP request is easy to queue and all the other stuff that was in 320, but it's something that's a little bit more heavily tested and in heavier use.
Is it doing something for the graphics? I think they should have something for, I don't know, maybe you can tell me whether there's any typical graphics library. Like
I have the coolest thing ever for you. Let me look. Yeah, a gradient inside, and another rectangle here, maybe. Oh, say an ellipse. And it's got a gradient inside. And see how it occludes the one behind it. We can click this factories thing. If we want to, we can have it make a source code. So we can say, I'm on iOS. I want, let's do core animation instead of Cocoa Touch. It makes a layer for us. And then we hit, let's see, where's this going to go? Documents, image.in. Let me just stick in the CG context for you. You can really learn a lot about core graphics from this thing. And I find it really quite useful for making things like buttons. Buttons don't scale very well if you just make images, right? If you decide you want it to be 65 pixels wide now instead of 62 pixels, you've got to go back into Photoshop, dump out the buttons at the right size, and then bring them back into your app. If you use code to draw them, you don't have to do that anymore. So one of the great things about 320 is that they have some nice core graphics code that will show you how to draw some buttons. But this has been a godsend to me.
So this opacity is something which is written?
Core animation layers. There are some new toys in core animation layers that are great. There's a CA gradient layer that makes a great background for a button. You can make rounded rectangles all day long. You can change the width of the stroke. You can do a lot of stuff in core animation and use that as the background layer for your button or what have you. And I'll swap layers in and out, and it's really fast because it's all OpenGL based. So anyway, I think I've got about 5 minutes left. I'm going to skip one example, and that example is just for your reference. A really simple one called cow. I'm going to just jump over it. If you ever want to make the calendar that looks just like the iPhone one, and there's sample code in there that will talk to the actual calendar store on the iPhone. So if you want to bring up somebody's calendar and show it to them inside of your app without kicking them out to the calendar app, this is how you would go do it. It's available there on GitHub, and I'm just going to pretend we talked about it. Cool. So CoverFlow. Everybody wants CoverFlow. And I'm going to probably not get all the way through this, but I'll hop and skip and jump and tell you at least where you can get mine. So there's Apple's CoverFlow, and this is one from a guy called Defage on GitHub, I think. Oh, shucks, I'll show you in a second. Anyway, so it's easy to understand. There's no crazy OpenGL stuff going on underneath the covers. I'll tell you how it works in a second, but here's what it looks like anyway. So, yay. So the same sort of general idea as all the other stuff that we've been talking about today. It has a protocol. It says, okay, here's my data source. Basically, it's saying what image goes where. And by the way, the sample code has a useful image loading subclass of NS operation. You guys know NS operation cube? Cool. So the way that it works is that you can set a subarray transform on a core animation layer. And it's sort of 3D, sort of not, but the idea is that you can get some depth, right? And so you can set the 3D rotation of these given layers as long as you set the subarray transform position M34 to negative 0.01. It's kind of, I'm going to just like wave my hands and say there's math involved. And basically what it's doing is it's setting the OpenGL model view matrix for you underneath the covers, and it's changing it enough that you can get some depth. That's really all it is. But, and here's where the open source problem hits harder than it does anywhere else. Beware the uncanny valley. Do you know the uncanny valley? Have you ever seen that little android of Albert Einstein? The one that kind of talks and moves his eyes and stuff. It's really creepy, right? And the reason that it's really creepy is, at least according to this fellow whose name I've forgotten, but it'll hit me eventually, is that as you get closer to what looks like a real human from, say, a stuffed animal, like an android gets looking more and more and more like a human, there's a period in that evolution during which it looks more and more like a corpse. And they call that the uncanny valley. It's really frightening, actually, to see an android that's not quite human, but it's almost human, because it looks kind of like a dead guy. And that's how this AF OpenFlow thing looks to me. Beautiful code, by the way. Really, really well-written stuff. Really, really ridiculously clever. But it misses some stuff. One, I can see through here, right? In the real world, a reflection of something still occludes the reflection of the thing it occludes above it, right? So the fact that I can see through here is just wrong. It makes my skin crawl a little bit. Okay, so this isn't black and that isn't black. But look, here, this rotation angle is very slightly different from this rotation angle. Users notice that. The depth, you see how the edge of these is sort of somewhat behind, whereas the edge of these is pretty much lined up. These are things that you may think I'm being picky, but if you're going to re-implement code that is available on the iPhone, you have two choices. Either you get it almost as close to perfect as could be possible, and Scott Forstall, who famously used a jeweler's loop to look at the pixels on the iPhone before they released it, wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Or you make something that's idiomatic to the platform, but that doesn't look like apples. So if you want your code or anything that you're writing to look like apples, it better darn well look like apples. If it doesn't, that's okay. Cool. But you should really consider then making something similar but not exactly the same, like the carousel, for instance, in that magazine Rupert Murdoch put out. Anyway, there's a carousel in there. It looks kind of like CoverFlow, but it isn't, and it's obviously not. Everybody knows it's not apples. It's a really pretty UI, but if you want this, then you got to do it right. So those are the things that are wrong. It also feels like there's a lot of friction. When you slide your fingers across it on a device, it's like, right? But when you slide your fingers across CoverFlow, like on a device and it's apples, it's like, right? And it's got this really nice kind of, well, it's what Apple's famous for, this nice sort of tactile rubber band kind of feel, right? And of course, there's that reflection problem I talked about. So here's how I fixed it. Hacking others' code is actually kind of, and that notifying window will continue to send stuff down the responder chain like it's supposed to, because a whole lot of Apple code is expecting it to do so, and you don't want to break your stuff. But it'll also send a little note to your device saying, yo, dude, something happened, which is very useful. So, yeah, we'll skip that for now. So here's what my modifications of it look like. It's black. The backgrounds occlude like they're supposed to, and when you run it, because it's inside of a scroll view, it has that cool rubber bandy stuff going on. If I can find it, there it is. I hate that. Note to Apple. Anybody wants to retune my bug? Oh. If I open another project and the simulator is already running and I say build and run, I don't want the other one to continue running. So anyway, I've been able to figure out how to do elegantly yet, and I'm going to get it one of these days. The center of this is not the center of the screen right now. It drives me crazy. Because the rubber banding of the scroll view just sort of stops whenever it's done with its friction, right? So there has to be a means by which we can calculate about when it's going to stop, and so we can modify its friction very slightly so it stops at the right spot. Haven't yet figured out how to make the scroll view do that. If anybody wants to like show me how awesome they are at writing code, fix that for me. But yeah, this is actually in a few released apps because a couple of friends of mine were like, holy shit, you have cover for it. And I'm like, it's not right yet. They're like, I don't care, I had it. So there's mine. So yeah, to do. So the flipping view thing is actually really easy. I just haven't had time to do it. And I've done a little bit of work with gesture recognizers, but for some reason the hit testing, when you're doing this 3D stuff, in iOS 5, it's weird, and it might just because I'm doing something wrong, but when I tap on the right side, the hit testing gets weird, but when I tap on the left side, it doesn't. So I just changed that like a couple of nights ago or last night, or my days all run together. So anyway, my mods are available here. There's an update for iOS 5 that I put up last night. Has a few bugs in it yet. Get in touch with me if you'd like to help out. And there are other implementations. There's FlowCover, that's OpenGL. It's kind of an old one. Plausible Labs, there's this guy called Landon Fuller. If you don't read his blog. He's a genius. I mean, hats off kind of genius, man. He makes everybody I know look like an idiot. And he just hired the other genius I know, which is great. Freaking take over the world. And then, of course, I have to put a little tiny plug-in for my app. That's Google Docs. It's a Google Docs reader. I'm this guy. And I have some more talks tomorrow. I've got an augmented reality on the iPhone talk. The first one is going to be geographical augmented reality, so you put stuff on markers out in the real world, optimizing data caching for responsiveness, and then this was originally something else, but it was accidentally a duplicate of an earlier talk, the one I just gave before this one, and so I'm going to do a talk on computer vision and the sort of finding stuff in the scene kind of augmented reality tomorrow afternoon. So I know I've gone over. Thank you for sticking around. If anybody wants to ask questions, you can come up front because I think everybody's ready to hit the road, so to speak, and thanks.